Whether it is fellow English literature students like me, critics or casual readers, we all retain great pleasure in interpreting a text. To truly gain a thorough understanding of a text's meaning, how it achieves this, what it has to say on its subject matter, and so forth. Which brings up a very important question that is still being discussed. In the interpretation of a literary text, where does authority lie? This is a hard question to ascertain, but there have been many scholars and critics who have contributed to this debate. One of the most prominent is Roland Barthes' essay The Death of the Author, in which he argues that while a writer should be praised for his mastery of narrative code, their role is ultimately a mere performance. Their purpose is to produce, not interpret their work. According to Barthes, it is language that speaks, not the author. An author is dead the moment his work has a reader. This argument has both its flaws and merits depending what text and context it's applied to. However, I feel too much has been left unaccounted for in the case of the former. To illustrate, take one of our most historical playwrights, William Shakespeare. Despite how fundamental studying his works is to literature and how much we exalt him, we have little of Shakespeare's life and him as a person documented. The playwright himself is effectively dead, both physically and socially. Barthes' death of the author theory is in effect in the case of Shakespeare. With the limited knowledge we have as him as a person, reader and critic interpretation is all we have to access his works. However, Barthes' theory falls short once applied to Shakespeare's works, with the notion that if the author doesn't have the right to interpret text, why does authority belong to the reader? Barthes tells us to ignore the author and that we shouldn't focus on his person, his history, his tastes, his passions, etc. in regards to a text's interpretation. Yet the interpretation of a text by the reader changes depending on their history, their person, their tastes, their passions, etc. Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice can be read as anti-Semitic, with its ill treatment and stereotyping of the character Shylock. At its time of conception, this was perfectly acceptable and is seen as part of a comedic act. The character of Shylock was used by the Nazis as propaganda against the Jewish, reinforcing the negative stereotype of them as pilferers and avaricious. In current mainstream society, we consider that attitude distasteful. A reader's interpretation changes with the era and their culture's values, so why? Why does the reader hold authority over the author when they are just as guilty? Barthes' essay itself fails to address what giving power to the reader might entail if the reader is in a position to abuse its power over a text. The birth of the reader must be at the cost of the death of the author, according to Barthes. But what about the birth and death of a text? Jean Rhys's Wide Sargasso Sea acts as a prequel to Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre. It tells us the prehistory of Rochester's lunatic first wife, Bertha Mason. Those were the deliberate intentions of the author, yet if the writer has no claim to this, surely, in theory, a reader can deny those elements of the story if they so wish, simply because they do not share the same writer, or because Wide Sargasso Sea is written in a different era entirely. If the text's very purpose of creation is denied, author or no, surely that means the text is effectively dead in some fashion. According to Barthes, to give a text an author is to impose a limit on that text. But that does not mean a reader cannot restrict the significance of a text if they are closed-minded. Using Wide Sargasso Sea, if you take away its connection to Jane Eyre, it destroys the commentary towards its inspiration and the impact of its fallen protagonist. Roland Barthes sees giving an author power a limitation, but who's to say an author cannot add to a text interpretation? Yes, an author can have a fixed view, but we as readers should challenge it, not deny its existence. It is beneficial for both the author and the reader. A text should act as a link, not a division. Barthes' death of the author theory is dependent on the text and context it is applied to be seen as both positive or negative. Barthes' theory is better suited towards certain texts than others. When applied to poetry, the results are considerably more intermittent. Poetry, by its very definition, is generally employed in those utterances and writings that call for heightened intensity of emotion, dignity of expression, or subtlety of meditation. So one could argue that in order to truly understand and interpret poetry, we are forced to acknowledge the poet, aka author, for we miss the poem's vital elements if we were to ignore how the poet felt when it was written. But the death of the author theory is having to compete with the very definition of poetry to apply itself. Many poems are written from personal experience or pondering. As with Wide Sargasso Sea, if you deny the aspects of the author's choosing within the text, you are effectively killing it, as the text loses its value. But on the other hand, a vast amount of poetry is shrouded in metaphors deliberately by the poet. It's designed, so to speak, for the reader to interpret its secrets. Some are only surface-level riddles, such as Robert Frost's The Road Not Travelled, while others hide their meanings deep, like T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. Surely with poems of these kind, they need a reader, so to speak, in order to live. I would not say the reader is given authority over the poem, but rather it's a symbiotic relationship with the poet. Another example is Robert Browning's My Last Duchess. It's already widely known that the poem was inspired by the 5th Duke of Ferrara's young wife and her untimely demise. We do not need a poem to repeat history as is. But if a reader is to take a closer look, we see that Browning has added life to the story. By underlying tones of masculine control over beauty, hinting of murder most foul, etc. It requires both the poet and the reader to accomplish its interpretation. From my previous statements, many would be inclined to believe I disagree with Roland Barthes' The Death of the Author essay, but that is not entirely correct. I do believe that an author should not have authority over their text, but I do not believe that we should just give it to the reader either. A piece of text cannot exist without its author, and their position as such should be respected. I believe an author has the right to a text's foundational origin and can add to it alongside the reader's. Barthes is right, no text is truly original, but I would argue neither is the reader or the author. Without originality, there should be no authority figure, but rather people who add to literature. So to answer the question, in the interpretation of a literary text, where does authority lie? I believe it's giving authority in literature that causes stagnation. Literature is a culture. The more we develop our ability to interpret a text, it reflects on our cultural growth. To put someone in authority of that is the real limitation.